oh, and speaking of Q&A, if you have questions for any of the readers, we will have time at the end for that. You can send those by chat, and Heather will read those to our readers today after everyone has presented. So thank you. And I will now turn it over to Jessica Kalista.
Hi, everybody. So amazing to see you all tonight. And I'm really excited to see the writers present. I just wanted to say thank you to Stephanie, to Heather, to everybody at Fenwick Gallery, to Chen, also, who I'm just seeing for the first time. So it's awesome to sort of virtually meet you. So thank you for all the amazing work that you've done. And I just want to say that with Conjuring Presence, we worked really intentionally towards an inclusive and equitable idea of what an exhibition is. And in the curatorial statement, I asked artists to consider and respond to questions that are central to understanding and shaping this kind of inclusive space and collaborative space that we want to have. And we asked questions like, what does it mean to become mindful of the need to work against erasure when we understand who is not present and why? And who decides whether some people are or are not allowed to be present to occupy spaces in the arts and academia? And how do we acknowledge the past, work for a future, and still ground ourselves in present? And so I don't want to take up any more time, really. I'm so excited to hear from writers and about these collaborations, and I'm so in love with all of the works. So thank you, everybody, for being here. And I just want to pass it over to the awesome collaborators.
Okay, thank you so much, Jessica, both for your guidance, your curation, and for being here tonight. I should also mention, and sorry, because of the handoff, I didn't mention initially that Jessica is also an alum of Mason's creative writing program and a faculty member in School of Art. And so kind of uniquely situated to curate this exhibition, but also Jessica is the founder of the gallery Ollie Ollie, an alternative art space in Fairfax, Virginia, and also curates and co-moderates CVPA's Arts in Context Criticos Racist Anti-Racist reading group, which I believe has its last meeting of the semester on this Friday. But in case you're interested, that series is ongoing and is a welcoming community within Mason, and is open to people from outside of CVPA as well.
Yeah, we welcome everybody to join us, and we'll be back again in the spring, starting on February 18th.
Okay, and I'm just yeah, I just wanted to mention that because it is like directly connected to the you know, some of the things that we're trying to address in this exhibition. And so I'm going to put that link in the chat, and then we're going to hear from 3 different writers and artists, or 4 different people, but 3 different pairs today. So first we'll hear from Eli Vandegrift, who's a current student in Mason's MFA in creative writing. Eli received their BA in English with concentrations in cultural studies and creative writing from Mason in 2020. Now a first-year MFA candidate in poetry, they decided to pursue grad school mainly to keep their library privileges. So very appropriate to be showing work in the library. Eli is the recipient of the 2020 Joseph A. Lohman III Award in Poetry from GMU and the Academy of American Poets. They're interested in hybrid genres, hybrid creatures, and the relentless fluidity of being. Their work is featured in Pussy Magic, Poets.org, Entropy, the TEMZ Review, Feral, Angel Rest, and Capsule Stories. So welcome, Eli.
Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. I'm Eli. So I collaborated with an amazing photographer and artist named Bita. And I don't think Bita's here tonight, but we were going to try and play, I think, her video while I was reading. So we did not collaborate like together. Like we created our works and our projects separately. But I really love how they kind of became like a conversation with each other. So I'm going to go ahead and read like my statement for, how I created these poems, talk about a little bit about the work that inspired me. And then it's kind of a longer piece. It's like 12 pages roughly, I think like 10 or 12 pages. So I think I'm only going to read the last poem, which is, I think it's my favorite one. So yeah, I'm going to start with my statement, which is, so while working on these poems, I was really interested in the idea of presence and its connection to the body, especially responding to the questions that were provided in the prompt. Are we living in the present moment? What does it look and feel like to be present in our bodies? And when we leave this realm, is our presence still felt? And so my work recently has been interested in the idea of the humanimal, or on the intersections between human identity and kind of animal identity and embodiment. So what I wanted to do with lichen poems is I kind of wanted to attempt to explore the image and embodiment of lichen as a way of navigating body and presence. So lichen is not quite animal. It's not really a fungi. It's not really a plant. It's a very fluid creature. And so I was really interested in ways that we can kind of navigate identity, specifically queer identity, in relation to this fluid kind of animal plant type creature. And there's no like really like label to put on it, like very much in the similar way of you can't really put labels on people. You can put identities and like people can identify, but like there's so much fluidity and complexities in between them. And so some of the work that inspired me with this project was Myung Mi Kim and Philip B. Williams. I was lucky enough to be in their workshop classes when they visited this semester. Myung Mi Kim was just here, I think last week. And so their work has really inspired me in their kind of ideas of fluidity and their ideas of like, using space on the page and all of that. And so with Bita's work especially, I really loved how fluidity comes through in kind of melding the human and the tree, human and plant, and kind of so on. And so while we worked separately on our projects, I really did love the result that came about and how the works are really kind of in conversation with each other. So I'm going to just read the last poem in my collection. So it's comprised of 3 poems, all called Lichen 1, 2, and 3. So I'm going to read the third one just because, it's a Tuesday night. Like I feel like everyone is tired, but like I just wanted to read like one poem tonight. So I'm going to go ahead and read. So Lichen 3, crawl next to me, and like an artery I convey a pounding, drooling circuitry, mouthless. I sing with electric blue spit, like the space between 2 hands, each one too scared to reach out first. Sweating, I am every palmful of dirt in every forest, and yet I am nothing and something else. Why is there always a this and something else, a binary and everything outside of it, a binary bound? I await your response, hope the sickness has not reached you, though I would hear it first, a rattle across the green and orange, the colors of a cough and no sleep, of bags under eyes and a request, in turquoise tones. With roots like these, we are always connected, but still may I touch you, like long distance lovers, this fungal absence. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thank you so much, Eli. And it's true. I think even hearing you read simultaneous with the video really showcases those resonances between your works and Vita's video work. That was beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, exactly. And so now I'll introduce Holly Mason Badra. Holly Mason Badra is a queer Kurdish American poet who graduated from the George Mason University MFA Creative Writing Poetry program in 2017. Holly's poems, interviews, and reviews have been published in various journals, and some can be found on her website, hollymorganmason.com. She currently lives in Northern Virginia with her wife and very adorable dog, and is on the administrative team in the GMU English department. And so Holly's collaborated with Deb Savini, who's a faculty member in CVPA, and will tell us about the collaboration. Welcome, Holly.
Thank you so much, Heather. Thanks to everybody who has curated this incredible experience. I have done many of these showcases in my time in the program and since then, but this one was particularly nourishing, really. So talking with Deb, collaborating with Deb truly started as a conversation. Before we even talked about our artwork, we just got to know each other as humans. And I think that that relationship building offered us the foundation of trust. And so we trusted each other as individuals before we trusted each other as artists. And we were able then to build on that foundation and be really vulnerable with each other, and vulnerable about pieces of ourselves now and our histories. And out of that vulnerability came a bunch of themes and connections. So we talked a lot about the collective and being in community. And we talked a lot about that balance between isolation and stillness, especially in the time of the pandemic, and sort of how that balance between on one side you have isolation and stillness, but on the other side you have connection and community, and how connection and community can be this energizing space, but so can this space of stillness and isolation. And so we ended up talking a lot about balance. And we talked a lot about spirituality and reclaiming spirituality and spiritual practices, the spiritual practices that we reclaim now being different than spiritual practices that we inhabited in our childhood. And so from there, we talked about care and sort of this idea of spirituality, spiritual object, ritual, and self-care. And sometimes self-care being connected to caring for others, whether that be others in the sense of plants, others in the sense of animals, others in the sense of family, others in the sense of community. And so all of that being wrapped up together. So from there, I have a couple notes because our conversation was just so full, and both of us were sitting across from each other at the table with our masks on, just writing. And then we would tell each other, like, as we're talking, oh, I wrote this word down and this phrase down. This is what's standing out about what you're saying. And then we talked about using nature and communing with nature as a way of conjuring presence. So we kind of landed on this idea of nature as a space for ritual, as a space for meditation, and as a space for sort of feeling connected to the self again. So that being said, I'll now read the poem that came out of that. And I am going to pull it up on my screen here, the full poem. And this poem is an obad, which is usually sort of like a morning song. The history or tradition of the poem is sort of like this idea of two lovers waking in the morning and, oh, curses to the sun, because it means now like the day is upon us and we might part or whatever. So Conjuring Presence, an obad with grain, gold, and feather. Morning touches the cottage window. We wake to the sound of cows grazing, this idyllic pastoral. We are learning to listen to each other's silences, to ease the landscape of the mind. Two calves touch heads, siblings whispering. Their bellied songs hold us where we are gazing. Horses at the fence flex their muscles, hooves in the grain. The word pasture sounds like pastor. I have better experiences with the first. The barn cat drops a feather at the door. What was once in flight is now grounded. I recall the angel figurine in the flower display at Baba's funeral, her wings lined in gold. I kept the small statue to remind me of Baba's all-encompassing calm, a feather of a man, light, soft, ephemeral, radiant too, like a peacock's plumage, and a sense of majesty to match. The angels of my childhood are tarnished by exclusion. I've met earth angels since then. The woman on the metro empathizing with me after a night gone not so right. My nephew, when he offers me a kiss without request. My beloved, who reminds me to be here now. She says, don't go down the rabbit hole, return. A bird has built a nest on the deck. I open the door, small chirps asking. We are all born with this soft hunger. Hold it in your hands. So this was the first time I ever wrote the poem before the artist created the artwork. Every time I've ever done this, I wrote ekphrasis, basically a poem musing off of the artwork. And so it was really exciting to see what when Deb called me on the phone to say how she was reading my poem and what she picked up on, and how that sort of influenced her work. So she picked up on the sort of repeated imagery of hands and feather, and sort of the idea of shape and holding, the idea of holding and being held. And she really, one thing she said that I didn't even realize about the poem is sort of the movement in terms of sound and sort of that movement from quiet to noise, back, that return to quiet. So I see in her work sort of that, again, that balance, that mixture of materials, of mediums, that kind of texture. And of course, she picked up, the gold in there as well. So, yeah, we kind of both ended in this space of collective, simultaneously thinking about the idea of lift and groundedness, and the idea of conjuring presence being the space where maybe you're both at once experiencing this incredible groundedness, but also this sense of lift internally. So that's really, all I have to say. And I'm really grateful for this experience. And truly, even just talking with Deb, I felt like this incredible presence from her. And we were conjuring presence just by being in conversation together. So thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you so much, Holly. It's just very moving to hear you talk about your collaboration and to think about the energy that you bring to the table, when you interact with people. And I feel like that openness comes through in the poem too, the openness, that the way that you move through those associations and leaps is the thing that really struck me about the poem when I first read it in the exhibition. So thank you. I feel like I'm in tears from your reading and discussion. So I will just move on now, but I really appreciate that. And it's just such beautiful work from both of you. And it was really fascinating to hear about the conversation and your note taking. And thank you for sharing all of that with us. Okay, so next up, we have a collaborative pair who are both here with us. So thank you for being here, Vivek and Boris. I'll just read both of your bios right now and then let you take the floor. Vivek Narayanan's book of poems include Universal Beach, Life and Times of Mr. S, and the forthcoming book After, which will be published by New York Review of Books next year. He teaches in the creative writing program at Mason and serves on the editorial board for Poetry Daily. Boris Willis is an associate professor of computer game design at George Mason University, the founder of Black Russian Games, and chief artistic officer of Boris Willis Moves. He has performed with Strab, Jacob's Pillows, Men's Dancers, and Liz Lerman. He's the founder of the dance video blog, danceaday.com. Willis has an MFA in dance and technology from the Ohio State University, a BFA in dance from George Mason, and is a graduate of the North Carolina School of the Arts. He is the recipient of a Kennedy Center Local Dance Commission, a Virginia Commission for the Arts Choreography Fellowship, and was a 2018 Artist in Residence at the Watermill Center. So welcome and take it away.
Hi, so I'll say a few words, and then Boris will say a few words, and then Boris will show just a bit of the piece, the video, and then time permitting, maybe we'll read some text. And so this really ended up being something that we I guess made together. The text is written by both of us, and well, I mean, I can only go so far with some of that, the technical, the AI stuff that Boris dances with, but he had me on the dealing with these sort of AI voice actors, and really thank you to Heather and Jessica and Stephanie and Chen, and this was an amazing process and amazing to meet Boris, and I mean, one of the things I feel sort of inspired by him is that he's so resolutely multidisciplinary, and that really was kind of inspiring and moving. And so, when we met, it was the same sort of thing. We just talked and talked and talked and talked. So there was a lot of that, and we were, talking about how, for instance, what are the factors that determine whether a work is read, say, as a sort of statement of identity or a kind of reflection of the person making it, or as a formal, innovation and so on. What determines that, and how how the question of kind of abstraction and narrative speak to each other. How what determines kind of the way something opens up one way or another, and then we were thinking for a long time about different encounters. What happens when you encounter something sort of different, or someone different or uncertain, and how do you end up, how does it kind of open up something in you, or perhaps change your perception of both them and in yourself, and how do those things kind of play out? And I think that the text we ended up writing, so one part of it was the meta-humans, which I think Boris will probably say more about, but these sort of artificially intelligent kind of constructions. In my case, I was at one point I was working with these sort of AI voice actors, which are basically these models that had been trained. I think they'd gotten these actors to read pages and pages of text, so that the AI voice would then, if you gave them a new text, it would try to perform that text in a way that these actors had taught it to do. So it's a sort of strange thing of somewhere between the real and the imaginary, and I think the texts also end up sort of in that kind of space. And one thing we were trying to do was to put together text and to write it in such a way that it would be sort of absent of certain signifiers, like, for instance, place or so on, so that the text could travel and be kind of inflected in these different ways by these different kinds of performances, some of them which maybe almost real or slightly off, or, and how does that how does that change your perception of a text to see it move through these different kinds of inhabitations and performances? And the last thing I want to say is that I think this really opened up something for me, and I think we find ourselves really thinking of what we did. So we continue to work on this, and I think Boris will say something about sort of directions it might go in, but this was really just a first stop for us in this kind of unfolding kind of journey, and at each point we don't really know what the outcome is going to happen, or how we're going to be affected by it's like you don't know what's going to happen when you give your text to one of these voice actors to kind of perform, and how does that, what does that mean? And that question of what that means is something that I think we're still kind of learning and trying to understand. So yeah, Boris.
Thank you, Vivek, and thanks to everyone who has put together this exhibit. Yeah, so, not to sort of repeat what Vivek had just said, but there was definitely for us, this sort of coming together and having a lot of conversations about who we are, where we're from, and then how to write in such a way that doesn't necessarily reflect that. How can we sort of have an identity or not have an identity as we are sort of in the process of creating, and what does that mean, and how do we have multiple identities and multiple ways of seeing and multiple ways of being seen. And I think that was some of the things that we had come up with. And so the technology part of this was, for me, finding or creating these creatures, these beings that look human, but were not really people, but they look very close to how people look. They can move and be animated, so they can give you this sense of that they are real people, but they're not. But they have some qualities of real people. And then I also found this AI voice, these AI voices. And so all this is within the context of a video game engine. So it's using these AI voices, these sort of humans, training the AI to be able to replicate some sense of humanity, and these other beings, these meta-humans, who also give you some sense of what it is to be in this sort of virtual space. And so our writings were really a culmination of pairing these two ideas together in ways that may or may not match up, knowing that somewhere along the way that the human brain is going to make connections where we don't intend them to happen, or we don't anticipate they're going to happen. And so we sort of exchanged poems, and then I had him sort of learn this AI program, and he put together the audio files that were taken. So if for every scene there is 2 or 3 different versions of it, and they play randomly, so you never know exactly what the sound is going to be or what voice is going to be heard. And so the version that you're going to see is an earlier version. So, you know, after I sort of submitted the version that we had, I sort of continued to work on it and continue to add other animations and other things and other ideas. So it's sort of like a living construct. It's more of an application now than simply a video. But what you're going to see is the video version of that. So Stephanie, are you going to show the?
Yes, sorry. I had, you also have
but
screen share in case you need to, but I will pull that up. All right.
If you could, I don't know if you can scrub forward at all.
Yeah.
But if you could scrub forward to where, right there, just after this, yeah, somewhere right around there. Yeah,
all right.
that was great.
Was balance. A vast gilt cathedral on the tip of the nose.
When they walked by, it was said, anyone can have status. It is never guaranteed. It is at times expected. There are those who feel entitled to have it. Everyone can have status, but there are those who feel entitled to have it. Everyone does not get status. Everyone can have status. There are those who prefer status to health, comfort, and opportunity. They will pay with their lives for status. Everyone does not get status. Anyone can have status. They stopped walking, destroyed the place, and went home. There are names we try to leave behind, and those that follow us on our journeys. I mistook you for another, or I mistook you for you, and the other was just a name that had arrived on the wind. The name had arrived as if by its own energies, a name I had wanted to say and so had come to me. But the name was not yours, even as I hadn't mistaken you for another. The name was my own paltry shame in my mouth until a quiet had descended between us. We were strange but bound falsely by a name, just as years earlier a group of giggling tourists had pointed to me until it was revealed I looked exactly like one of them. And I did. It was so eerie. The name was not yours then because you were a stranger. The name was not yours even if you were not mine. The name had been a way of unhappening between us, an unplanned intimacy. The name that might have been ours was no longer yours or mine. There by the bending light of evening, as the tram pulled to a stop, the doors opened and the conductor roamed about inside. The name, like all invited, refused to leave. Not before the world. That thing has vocational substance on the roadway.
Thank you.
So do you want to read a text, or should we read from the thing?
Yeah, you can read one.
Some days I even made them believe that I was one of them, one of their own blood, which I was by phenotype. I had come in after their strange pain of being told their place and then their bitterly claiming it. Never the front door, always the side and the back. Other days it was the simple joy of being listened to. We were in the new world where all would now be allowed to mingle. To encounter yourself or a version of yourself was just a reminder of its existence, its persistence through the many sides. And much that I and they had in common, the language we spoke reminded us we were the losers. Now our scraps could become whole, but little flashes happened, little pockets of time in which people died. The one charging rides for the taxi grabbed my arm and held it for too long. When I returned years later to the beach where I had made the offering, the first thing was to kiss the ground.
Not before the world. That thing has vocational substance on the roadway. Never before Zion did geometrics converse into baguettes and bows. My sense of euphoric commitment dwindles into fathomable onus. Sweet, sweet, sweet. Hunger roars. Circus shakes the tavern. No mole on the cow, it affects the flavor. The seldom seen wanders into nothingness, while my pen desires more than it can handle. Blues, you recycle giraffes, but forget about baseball. No, but it can be fixed if you have a pencil. So cute, so wonderful. I miss you when it shows. I don't know. I really don't know who you were. I can't dance today. My thumb hurts, or at least I never know what to feel. Hey, who's wearing a fishbowl? I thought I took it off. Those acid wash jeans go well with reggae. Be, love, experience, love. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. That's just like so rich and fascinating. All of it, the reading excerpts that you just read, the video, and definitely if you have a chance to just spend time just before the video in the actual gallery, it's really mesmerizing. And for me, I was so I was blown away by the texts as they were performed. And I think it's so interesting to hear about that you decided to leave out certain types of signifiers, because I think that maybe adds a little to the uncanniness of the experience because it's still so highly specific. So anyway, I thank you. I do have a question for you, but I want to open it up first to see if anyone who's with us has a question for any of our participants tonight. And if you do, you can put them in the chat, or you're welcome to, just kind of alert us and then go ahead and ask it verbally. Well, in case any of you are formulating your questions, I'll ask one that I had in the meantime, because I know that Boris and Vivek, initially, you had conceived of having an interactive console with the video so that people would be able to input something or participate somehow. And I was a little bit curious about how that might how that might take shape for future iterations of your collaboration. And I was also wondering if you would like to, if you would say a little bit about the nature of your writing process as you're collaborating on the writing together. I'm just always curious about how people like literally get down and do the writing when you're collaborating together, whether you're sharing a file back and forth or sitting in the same room or that kind of thing?
I feel like we told each other stories. So there were like this exchange of stories. I told him about, so we had talked about, just sort of giving ourselves some sort of personal history. And then as we were talking about these things, I think Vivek sort of came up with the idea of there were these encounters. And so we're like, oh yeah, encounters. And so what were these encounters about? And so that sort of became the thrust of it. So finding ways to come up with encounters or think about encounters, or and I feel like so the poem that I read tonight was what I call a sight poem. So what I would do was I would walk around a specific place and write down words and gather a bunch of words in a particular order. They mostly would stay in that order, and then I would connect them together with other words that I thought gave it some context. So not before the world, it is in a Veda, that thing has vocational substance on the roadway. So it doesn't really make any sense, but what I'm doing is I'm recreating the images that I see from a particular place. And so that was sort of my process, or I would sort of sit somewhere, observe what's going on around me, and then begin to write down sort of ideas or words or moments and string those together.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to I mean, the conversation, there were these long conversations we were having, and then somehow they ended up, I mean, we went writing side by side. When we were together, we were just talking, and then we went away, and then and we knew that, like I knew that, for instance, that it has to be designed in such a way as to be performed by these metahumans, these beings, and so I don't know, there was something about, I think just the conversation and the process, which I just felt like it kind of released something surprising in me. I didn't so I don't think we really knew what would come out. We just, I mean, at some point it started to become clear that maybe it'd be good to kind of match up prose in that sense, or to put it in prose, having certain contours. But apart from that, we wanted to keep it really as open as possible, and to have that word encounters, just be kind of, that's all, that was the only thing really to tie it together, that and our conversations. And I mean, the idea was also to find a way to kind of invite more and more people into this, that it would become more powerful, that the more people were brought into this. And finally, it became a question of time and technical, sort of whole bunch of, at some point there's a whole bunch of technical problems that have to be solved, and so then you sort of have to put the ideation aside and just try to kind of solve those problems. And but eventually, I mean, I think it'd be interesting to, because the performance by these metahumans kind of transforms the text, or kind of changes it in some way. And if you see the different, for instance, the different voice actors handle the same text, it plays out differently. And so it would be interesting to find a kind of a process or a constraint whereby people could submit things, So that's one of the projects to for the future as this thing develops. Yeah.
Oh yeah, thank you. Thanks so much for elaborating on that a little bit. Okay, does anyone else who's with us have any other questions? I mean, the questions could be for our curators or participants too.
I have a I have a question actually for Holly and Eli. And first to say, I mean, I did get to spend a lot of time with the exhibition, and it was really amazing. The kind of range of things and the ways that each was kind of setting out on its own, and how these different exhibits were also talking to each other. But I had a chance to see the poems on the page, and then there's a performance. So I was curious to know how the different lives that the poem lives, both as it is in the exhibition on a page and in performance. I mean, I was fascinated by the use of space in both your poems, and this ties into, of course, me Kim also, because it was, we had a long discussion before we watched the thing, and then we watched the thing and we were kind of transformed by her performance of it. So how do you understand the different possible lives that your text lives on the page and in performance and all of those things?
Holly, do you want to go first?
I can, though I feel like you may have more to say given the shape your piece takes. But I would just say something I was thinking a lot about while you were speaking about the goal of your project ideally being something where you could involve more folks for Vivek and Boris. And that's Deb's initial plan, was she really wanted the piece, her art piece, to have an element of audience engagement, to where folks would come in, see the piece, maybe write something on a feather, add a feather. And so what's interesting about that is initially when we were thinking that, of course, COVID kind of made it, we felt like with COVID, it wouldn't be quite safe. So that kind of, we abandoned that for now. But when we were thinking along that path, this is just to say that I was thinking very differently about the shape the poem would take. When I was thinking of a collaboration that might also then have this level of audience engagement, my thoughts were, oh, should I have, a couplet, 2 lines of the poem on a feather, on these feathers that are added, right? Like, what does that look like? But ultimately, given that we didn't go that path, it ended up just being sort of a little more traditional on the page. So, in terms of the space it takes up, I don't have anything exciting to say. I wish I did. I would be making something up if I did. So I'll turn it to Eli.
I love that. I think it would have been really cool if you could have, if that could have happened, with the feathers, being added. That would have been so cool. But I also understand with COVID and everything, you probably want to have less people touching things as possible. But that is a super amazing idea. Yeah, I mean, as far as my poems went, one of the things that Beta and I talked about a lot was just this idea of fluidity. And both of our works really we really wanted to encapsulate the idea of fluidity between the human and the animal, or the human and the plant and nature. And so I think with my work in particular, it really did, it transformed over the course of like the past like 2 months. I started with like the first like lichen poem, which was the longest piece. It was actually lichen 2. And then I had another one. And then finally I remember having a conversation with Stephanie over email, just like, I started with like 5 pages, then I got to 10 pages, now I have 12. And it's just like, I had so many pages and I didn't really know what to do with it, but I didn't really also want to lose out on that, like how it has literally like lichen, it grows across. And so like, I really didn't want to kind of like lose on that. And so I really appreciated the conversations that I had with Stephanie as well, with like, we were kind of trying to figure it out. Cause at first I was trying to see if like, maybe I could do like a circle, like around the video that Beta had, like have like the pages spread out. And then Stephanie suggested like having a zine or like a little booklet. And I really love the booklet idea, just cause, it's a more, having the work like on the wall kind of spread out might not be as like, people, I feel like people are much more inclined to like pick up a book or like pick up like a piece of work that you can actually touch and engage with. And so I really love that idea. Yeah. And so like, I guess it really did kind of become this thing of like, I have this one poem and then it has grown into another one, literally growing into another one. It's just, it really kind of transformed over the course of a couple of months, which, is interesting in the context of like these projects about presence and taking up space and like literally taking up space on the page. So yeah, that was kind of a rambling answer, but I'm not super good at like thinking about things on the fly.
Yeah, actually, thank you. That was actually great and interesting to hear about how it grew. And I was so intrigued by your thinking about lichen and the humanimal and thinking about this fluidity between us and our like embodied selves and the and the rest of the natural world, and then thinking about on another side of that the meta human that's present in Vivek and Boris's work, and thinking about how this theme led Holly and Deb into thinking about community and embodied like this grounded and light. And then I guess just these really different explorations and conceptions of humanity within all of your works are just so fascinating. And I mean, it really, I really enjoyed getting a chance to read them sort of in conversation with one another before tonight, and thinking about all the ways that these 3 bodies of work speak to each other, actually. So it's just like, I just want to say thank you so much. This has been really inspiring conversation, and I really appreciate your so much all of your work in the show and sharing it with us with your presence tonight. I have one brief announcement, which is that we do have one more event in connection with this show, which is the artist talk, although this, that's not a hard distinction, obviously. But we'll have Jessica will lead a conversation with some of the other participants in the show on Monday, November 15th at 7:30. So 6 days from now, also on Zoom. And I just put the link in the chat, but of course, however you came to this link, you can also find it elsewhere. Is there anything else you'd like to add, Stephanie?
I don't have anything, just thanking all of our participants again. I mean, getting to work with you all in sort of setting this up and thinking about how it lives between these spaces. I think like what Vivek was talking about, the being physically in the gallery and what that allows, and where that also puts certain restrictions in place, and then really where that the virtual site sort of inverts some of that, but also is sort of this kind of isolated. You're often viewing it one-to-one rather than like in this space where you may have other people moving around you in the gallery. So I really appreciate that we've been able to do that, and that everyone has been that has trusted us with their work and with making this come together. So thank you all. And thank you to Jessica. Jessica, did you want to add anything before we close tonight?
Thank you. I mean, I just want to say thank you to everybody, and it is so inspiring. And I'm just have so much gratitude for all of you. And I hope that these collaborations, these connections were rich and healing and beautiful and exciting. And I hope you take the opportunity to grow them. That this is not just like a one-time thing here in this exhibition, that I hope that these connections, I'm just like so fired up and excited seeing everybody connected in this way. And so I hope that you'll take the opportunity, and it would be good for you to take the opportunity to grow the connections made. Thank you.
Okay, well, thanks so much. Good night, and hopefully we'll see some of you next week.